Hello friends, it's Chari and I'm going to create 3 different holiday cards today using one of the new stitching designs for the embroidery hoop. So I uploaded 3 new stitching designs for winter Christmas. One is the Festive Wreath, and this is the card that I created for my pattern page. I'm going to be recreating that card a little bit today, but just slightly different. But I also wanted to show you how you could take that same design and change it up for different holidays, not just Christmas. So I am going to do a little bit of stitching here at the beginning. We're going to kind of go through this quick. I do want to keep this in, so if you're new to stitching, you can kind of see how we start. But if you are new to stitching, there is a video on the intro to the embroidery hoop where I go over stitching a little bit slower. I did want to tell you that when I started this design, I'm starting with the dark green color because there's a lot more of that color. And when I get all this stitched in, I'll have openings left over where my lighter colors go and my berries go. Now I did want to point out that you could just stitch this all in one color if you wanted to. I like the 2 different colors of green because I think it gives it some more variety. And I like the little stitch berries. But what I'm going to show you in today's video is how you can add some beads for your berries. So adding some embellishments to make them even more sparkly and stand out is a lot of fun. So if you were going to do that, you could kind of skip the step that I'm doing here and stitch the whole circle, the whole ring in the same color. You wouldn't even have to stitch the berries. And we'll talk about that a little bit when I show you my other 2 wreaths and what I did on those. But for this one, I'm stitching it just like my pattern is with the 2 shades of green, and then I'll also stitch the berries and the bow at the bottom. I tried to design this so that you could stitch it just as it's shown and it still looks like a beautiful wreath with a bow, but I will show you today how to add some embellishments and kind of make it a little more special. So here you can see I've moved on to my red and I'm just filling in what's left of those squares left over. Now for the darkest green here, I'm going to split my thread in half so I have 3 strands. And this is where I'm going to do those long line stitches. And I thought that this just added some really fun extra texture to this wreath. So these are kind of like big, long pine needles in a wreath, you know, if you get one that has different kinds of pine boughs in them, and you get a lot of different texture. So when I'm done with these stitches here, this wreath will be stitched exactly like this pattern. So now I wanted to show you that I stitched 2 more of these wreaths, and you can see these are a bit different. I left off the bow portion at the bottom, and what I did for the lighter green and the berries is I just used another color. Again, you could stitch this in one solid color if you wanted, because we're going to embellish with these with all these fun beads. So for this one, even though it is stitched exactly like the pattern, I wanted to add some gold beads to it. And to add gold beads, I have a thinner needle that will go through the bead, and I'm only using 1 strand of floss. And I just happened to pull one of those leftover strands of that dark color. It really doesn't matter because it's green. It's not going to be seen too much. It's going to kind of blend in. And since I'm using beads, I'm actually tying it in a knot underneath one of the strings on the back. So it's nice and secure. And what I'll do is come up through one of the holes. Then I'm going to pick up my bead on my needle. And then I'm going to go back through the hole. And that little string is going to hold that bead in place. So I'm just going to work my way around my wreath and add some fun beads in there with the berries. And I just think this is a really cool look. You could also use some small sequins too. I think that would be really pretty. I think that the possibilities are endless on fun embellishments you could add. You could add some gemstones or anything like that. Now I'm moving on to one of the other wreaths that I created. This is going to be a winter wreath. So I stitched the dark green color in white, and then where the berries and the light green color was, I stitched in a light blue, leaving out the bow at the bottom because I am going to add some twine for the bow. So all those light greens and those reds, I used this light blue to stitch. Now I'm going in and doing those long stitches, but I'm using a silver metallic thread, which is going to give it a really cool winter shimmery look, I think. You can also see that I have 3 colors of beads up there at the top, and I'll be adding those as soon as I get all these long metallic stitches added in. I do like this silver color, it's much more subtle. If you wanted something that stands out a bit more, I think a nice blue would be pretty as well. So I have a dark teal, a light metallic blue, and a metallic silver for my beads. So I thought it would be fun to have 3 different colors. And on this one, since I don't have the really stark contrast of the colors of the red berries, I'm actually kind of using my light blue as a guide on where to put some of these beads. As I have said before, you could just stitch the whole thing white. I just think the added light blue adds even more interest and dimension. So what I did was I went around and did all the light blue beads and made sure they were well spaced. Now I'm going back around my wreath and I'm adding in the dark teal color, just making sure those are evenly spaced as well all the way around my wreath. And then once I get those done, I will go back again in the other direction and add some silver. And I think that this wreath turned out beautiful. You can see that I'm kind of leaving the bottom open. It doesn't have a lot of beads because that's where my bow is going to go, and I didn't want the beads to be in the way of the bow. Now my third wreath here is kind of a cool retro with the pink and the green and the blue. So I have blue and pink and green beads. And for this one, instead of doing one color all the way around, I thought I'd show you that you can just work your way around and have a nice even distribution of your beads. Again, I'm leaving it blank towards the bottom. I only have that one little bead down there so that I can put a bow. I had a lot of ideas for wreaths. I think you could come up with all kinds, like a brown wreath with white beads like gingerbread. I thought about a white wreath with rainbow beads. I thought that would be fun. But I'm just sticking to 3 in this video. So now I need to put a backer on each of these wreaths. Once all my sewing is done, then I can add this to the back. And I like to put a ring of glue around the outside. I do a little bit on the back of my strings, and then I'm lightly tapping the center so I can glue the center down so that it doesn't create a big shadow behind those holes. And what I like to do, because this is kind of bulky with the stitching and the floss, I like to place my hand on top and push down, and it will allow the cardstock to kind of form around that bulkiness. Because my hand is not flat like a block, it will push down the areas that need to be glued and leave the floss kind of up. So now that I've got them all glued together, and I used a 2.5-inch circle for the back, by the way, I am going to cut out the frame. So using the embroidery hoop window and frame add-on, I love this little scallop frame. I love that it kind of gives us some different options for our cards. So for each of these, I cut them out of a different cardstock, and I like to line mine up on my grid mat so I make sure it's nice and straight up and down, and then I line up one of those scallops at the top and the bottom. So for my traditional wreath here, I use some barn red cardstock. For my winter wreath, I'm using some silver sparkle cardstock, which I really love. That one, it's really pretty. And then for my retro wreath, I'm using some mermaid cardstock. And this is really fun to kind of do these in batches. Now I can add my little bow. I didn't want to add this at first until I got the backer and the frame on. And I'm using some of the thin twine for this. So for this one, I'm using the teal twine. And I like to cut 2 pieces and make a double bow. It just gives it a little more heft to it, and I just think it looks a lot nicer to have those 2 tied together. So once I get my bow tied about the size I need it to go and nice and tight, I can trim off those tails. And then to add these, I'm just going to add a dot of liquid glue right there where the knot will be, and stick my bow right into that liquid glue and then set it aside to dry. Now I'm just going to repeat the same process with my other 2 wreaths. So for my kind of retro colored wreath here, I am making a bow with the white twine, again doubling it up. and I'll just add it with a little bit of liquid glue and set that aside to dry. And then for this one, now I did stitch the bow on this one like I did in my original example, and I just wanted to show you that you can still leave that there. It kind of looks really nice behind the twine bow. It gives it a little more color. So let's go back to that original card. I did some stenciling and I cut my panel down to have a cardstock peek out on each side. I'm going to do the exact same layout for all three of these cards. So you can see I have my cardstock there ready and cut. So I'll start with that more traditional one, which is the one that my original example is. I have a piece of speckled eggshell cardstock. Now this is 4¼ by 5½, but I will trim it down when all my stenciling is done. And I'm using the Winter Sprigs background stencils for this one, and I started out with the one with the greenery and used celery stick ink. You could use a darker green, but I don't want it to distract too much from my little wreath. Now for this second stencil, I'm trying to stick just to the pine cones with the dough ink, and now I'm pulling in mermaid ink to fill in all those little kind of snowflake star shapes and the little dots. You could do them all the same color if you wanted, but this was just a choice that I wanted. I didn't want all those brown. And then the third stencil in the Winter Sprigs background is the little berries on the stems. And for this, I'll be using some wild rose ink. I don't want it too dark again because I don't want it to distract from my sentiment or my stitch piece. And then I'll just trim this down to 3¾ So I'm cutting off basically a 1/4 inch on each side so that I can have that little strip of cardstock peeking out on each side. And once I have it the right size, I did dust the edges of this one with some antique linen distress ink to kind of grunge it up just a little bit. Now moving on to my winter wreath card, I have a piece of mermaid cardstock and I'm using the snowflake background stencils. For this one, I wanted to do more of a tone on tone look, and you'll see that I'll do that with the pink as well. So I'm starting out with that first stencil using some mermaid ink. And I actually pulled out a smaller brush because I got into those snowflakes a little bit better. And then when I add my second stencil here, I'll do the same thing with the mermaid ink. But then you're going to see I'm going to pull in the peacock ink just to add a little more darkness to this second layer of snowflakes so that they aren't all exactly the same. But I did do the mermaid all over first, and then I pulled out the peacock and just added a little bit of that darkness to it. And then of course I'll trim this one down to be 3¾ and then I'm just going to dust the edges a little bit with that mermaid ink again. So it's the same process for all three cards basically. Now moving on to my kind of retro colored card, I have some ballet slipper cardstock. And I'm going to use the peppermint stripe backdrop. So I'm starting out with some Ballet Slipper ink, which is the same color as the cardstock, for the very wide stripes. I wanted this to be a little more subtle, but I like the stripes. I just didn't want them to be too bold. I thought about using some pattern paper from the Candy Cane Lane, but it just wasn't quite the look I wanted. And I also wanted to just share with you how you could use the exact same process and make three totally different cards. And then now I am using the Wild Rose ink to do the little stripes. And I'm just going back and forth on the stripes instead of going across them. I want to go parallel with them so that I don't move my stencil around. And this smaller brush really works well on these skinny stripes. Now this is going to look kind of splotchy right now, but as that ink absorbs in, it's going to be much more subtle. So I'll trim this one down as well, and then of course I'm going to dust the edges just like I've done on the rest, and I'm using some Ballet Slipper ink to do that. Now that I have them all stenciled here, I want to do my metallic paint splatters. So I'm kind of batch making all of these. So for this one, I'm using that really bright yellowy gold. For the snowflakes, I'm going to use the white metallic to give it that really pretty snowy look. And you can see I'm doing big splatters by tapping my paintbrush and small splatters by flicking it off the brush. And then for my peppermint stripes, I actually kind of mixed the white metallic with that really light kind of champagne-y looking metallic. And I did a lot of splatters on this one. So now moving on to my sentiments, I used Henry's ABCs to cut out the large words, and then I will supplement them with Henry's Build a Sentiment Winter to create my sentiments. I did use the Scripty Mary on my original design, but I wanted to kind of change it up just a little bit to show you the same style for all three cards. So I'm gluing my stenciled panels to my cardstock that's on the back. Now you could make a card base out of kraft cardstock, but I did not. I already had this piece of kraft cardstock cut, so I decided to just put the panel onto a regular card base. So I'm doing the same with my winter one. So the back piece is peacock cardstock, and then I'll just add this whole panel to a card base. And then for my pink one, I actually did make the card base out of vanilla malt cardstock. So you could do it either way. You could add it to a panel and add the panel to a card base, or you could make your card base that color that you want to peek out. So I have all three of my card bases ready, and I'm going to add my wreaths here. And I do like to pop these up and give them some dimension, so I'm putting some foam tape on the back of each wreath. And I like to line my card base up on my grid mat so I make sure it's nice and centered and straight. And of course, I'm sticking these kind of towards the top so that those sentiments can be at the bottom. And of course, I'll just do the same for my winter wreath and my retro holiday wreath. Now for my sentiments, I'm lining up the words on my card base, and then I'm going to take a piece of removable Scotch tape and pick them up so they're all together kind of as one. And I'll add my liquid glue to the back. Then I can pick them back up and lay them all down right onto my card base, and then carefully remove that tape. So I will do the same thing for all three. Now for this one, the word wishes, it needs to be kind of closer to the bottom because my stamped part of my sentiment will be above, whereas the other two, it will be below. So once I have this kind of ready to go, I'm actually going to check that warm winter fits up there nicely, and I'll just set that aside. And then I can add my liquid glue to the back of my letters and pop those in place. These would be really cool popped up with foam strips as well, but if you were making a lot of these, this would be the best way to go. And then I have the word happy for happy holidays on this one. Now this one doesn't stand out quite as much as the others because it is that light mermaid cardstock, but don't worry, I'm going to add some glitter to these die cut letters so they are going to stand out a little bit more and be nice and shiny. Now I need to add my stamped part of my sentiment to my cards. So of course I have warm wishes here from the Henry's Build a Sentiment Winter stamp set. And for this one, I'm stamping it in some Blue Jay ink so that it matches my die cut letters. For the Merry Christmas, I'm just going to stick to classic black ink to stamp the word Christmas below Merry, and I like it kind of to the right over here. I think that's kind of fun and dynamic on this card. And then for the happy is going to say Happy Holidays. And of course, with this stamp set, you could make the sentiment say anything you wanted for whatever holiday you are celebrating. And I stamped that holidays in peacock ink so that it kind of matched the colors of that card as well. So now I'm adding my glitter to my die cuts. You knew it had to happen, right? So I'm using my Stardust stickles to add some glitter to the bottom of my letters like they've kind of been dipped in glitter. And so I've added it to the wishes. I'll do the same to the Merry. I just really think that this makes those die cut letters stand out just a little bit more because they really catch your eye in the light. Now for the happy, I am going to change it up a little bit. I thought the Stardust stickles would not make it stand out quite as much. So I actually have peacock stickles, and this is a really pretty teal color that matches the colors of the card. and I just thought that this really helped make those letters stand out. You could also have ink blended and dusted the bottom of the letters to make them have like an ombre look if you didn't want to use the glitter, and you could kind of achieve the same effect. So you could continue to embellish these with gems or sequins, whatever you wanted, but I'm going to stop here. I think that this glitter on the letters is the perfect finishing touch for me today. Just think that catches the light and looks so pretty. So here are my 3 cards with the same design and layout, just switching up colors and stencils, and you get 3 very different looks to celebrate different holidays. So I hope you've enjoyed this video and this look on different ways to kind of change up this fun stitching pattern. You could also make these same cards with a die cut wreath too and get some really fun looks. Thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.